Well, good afternoon. How you guys doing? You awake? Well, we're glad you're here with us on Freedom Sunday. Stacy and Leslie on the first two services shared a little bit about what we're doing at noon today, which is to highlight human trafficking and what we're working to partner together to combat that. So with that said, I thank you guys so much for all you do and for your willingness to work together and to come and share. So you guys all welcome, Leslie and Stacy.
Oh, I gotta turn it on. Oops, that would be helpful. Okay.
Sweet. Okay, again, for those of you who weren't at the previous two services, my name's Leslie Reisenhauer, and I lead the Find Ministry here at New Song Church, and we're super excited for this noon service, and welcome anybody who's tuning in through the live stream, and we're really mostly excited about this because of the collaboration and partnership between Find and 31-8 Project, and so we're excited to bring this Sunday to you. We're excited that it's Freedom Sunday, another chance to build awareness in our community and to bring more education, and specifically education about human trafficking in North Dakota.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I mimic exactly what Leslie is saying as well. I'm Stacy Schaefer with 31-8 Project, and we have learned throughout our years as an organization that collaboration is key. So it's really important for us to be able to do events like this. So this morning, or I guess we're in the afternoon, but we want to keep this open for conversation, discussion. So if you guys have comments, questions, concerns, or things like that, we welcome that. We want you to engage in conversation, and we have a small enough group where I really feel that we can do that. At any point, even if we're not able to cover your question during the service today, we do have booths out in the gathering place, so you can ask us questions as well there. Otherwise, with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. But to do that, we're first going to show you a short video, and then we'll get into what we mean by this phrase, human trafficking.
I was born and raised in a small town in Southern Oregon, and I was a good kid in school. I grew up in a normal middle-class family. I got great grades. I was really active in sports, and I even graduated a year early. I was accepted into Oregon State University, and I had my dorm room already assigned, and I was really excited to move up to Corvallis. But that summer I got pregnant by my boyfriend, and I had to make a real tough decision whether I was going to keep my baby and unenroll from university or get an abortion and keep it all a secret. And that was a really tough summer for me. After I had the baby, I had some friends that had gone up to U of O to go to college, and they had an extra room in one of their apartments. It was at that time that I met a boy or a guy who pretended to take interest in me. I really thought he liked me, and we got along really well. He was really funny and charming, and he had a nice car, and he always picked up the tab. He had nice clothes. He told me he was a record producer, that he had a band up in Portland, and that's why he frequently went out of town. There's a saying that says when you take a child by the hand, you take the mother by the heart. And I really think that's what happened for me, because I had this new little girl and this man who showed this desperate attention towards her, like he wanted to really help make this family that I really wanted for my daughter. And he invited me to move in with him after about 6 months of dating, and I was really excited. And I brought him down to Southern Oregon to meet my family, and everything seemed fine until we arrived in Las Vegas. He said we were moving there because that was the entertainment capital of the world, and being a record producer and having a band, that's where they were going to get the most gigs and the most jobs, and that's where his job was leading him. So I desperately wanted to go with him, to be with him, and to start this family that he promised me. He pulled up to an escort service, and he said, "This is how it works in Vegas. I've spent a lot of money to get you here. I put first and last on an apartment. I filled your fridge up with food, and you're going to need to earn that money back." And I felt I felt trapped. I felt like, how am I going to get out of this? And you didn't know if you were going to live or die. You didn't know what he was going to do or what he was capable of. And so it was really scary. I can remember just running through the casino thinking, like, these people don't even have a clue what's going on. They're just, cha-ching, cha-ching, Las Vegas, yay! And they're doing all this stuff, and I'm running for my life. I'm running from a man that has forced me into doing things that I didn't want to do. When you have a trafficker that's waiting at home with your child and says, if you don't bring home $1,500, you're going to find your daughter out on the corner, I think I was probably more frightened to go home than I was to be in the room. Because if you got robbed, it was your fault for being stupid. If you got raped, it was your fault for not watching your back. Anything that happened to you was typically your fault, and you incurred more punishment for allowing those things to happen to you. So it made you always walk in fear of your trafficker.
Okay, so that video is a little heavy, but I like to show the video because I think it helps give us a picture of what we mean when we talk about human trafficking. I have met Rebecca on several occasions, and I can tell you that Rebecca is doing quite well. She actually has a nonprofit called Rebecca Bender Initiative. So she's really been able to use her story to create this wonderful organization and has empowered so many other women throughout the United States. But I'd like to open up with that and get your thoughts. What did you think about that video? How does it make it feel? How does it make you feel? Does it coincide with some of the beliefs that you have in regards to human trafficking? And feel free just to yell stuff out. That's perfect.
It's frustrating and
Mm-hmm.
makes me angry.
Yeah.
I guess I don't even, the conception in my mind, I think generally speaking, is just not that.
Mm-hmm. Right. And Rebecca's story is so common as well. It's a story we hear often. We don't always hear maybe the child being involved right away. Usually a child will come later on, but her story is something that we hear quite often. And so I think it's just important that we understand how easy somebody can be brought into this industry. They can really trust somebody, really believe that that person loves and cares for them, and then find out so much later that that wasn't the case at all. So today when we talk about this topic, I'm going to share some cases that we've had here in North Dakota, as well as just other case examples from across the United States. Some of the information I'm sharing with you, I don't do that to scare you. I do it because I want you to really understand the reality of human trafficking. So please keep that in mind as well as we go through this. How many people in the audience are familiar with human trafficking? Okay. Would you say you understand it really well, or you might have just heard it briefly a few times? Maybe briefly. Okay. In between, right? Okay, well, hopefully you can learn a little bit more today. But I just want to start with Genesis 37, verse 12 through 28. And I'm not going to read all that, but my point with showing you this verse is slavery has been around since biblical times. This is not a new thing. We know slavery has been around for a really long time. It just looks different than it did back to biblical times, to the transatlantic slave trade, to today. We also know from Genesis 38 that the objectification of women is also not new. These are concepts that we've read and we've heard about before as well. So we need to understand that this problem that we have today is something that has continued to grow over time. So first, to start with, I just want to break this down. Human trafficking can look like sex trafficking or labor trafficking. Now, there's some individuals that will experience both. They might be forced to work at a restaurant during the day and sold for sex at night. We have seen cases like that here in North Dakota, where people do fall in both categories. So it's important to understand that sex trafficking may be children, teenagers, or adults that are lured in by false promises and usually forced into prostitution. And labor trafficking are victims that are trapped in a cycle of debt, forcing them into involuntary servitude, debt bondage, and slavery. And that's kind of how we define the two different types of trafficking. Now, it's one way that we use to figure out, is this a case of human trafficking? We will use this model, act plus means plus purpose equals human trafficking. This was created by the Polaris Project, and what we'll look at is what happened. Was the individual recruited? Were they transported? By what means? Through violence? For what purpose? Servitude? That'll equal human trafficking. So that's one way that we're able to determine, is this a case of human trafficking in the work that I do? Now, human trafficking can occur anywhere, and I really mean that when I say anywhere. I went to grad school at Hamline University, which is in St. Paul, and I'll never forget one case that always comes to mind involved one of our schools in St. Paul. And what had happened is a trafficker had trafficked a young girl about 14, 15 years old. He was having her go into schools to recruit other girls. So one of the particular cases, this one girl befriended another girl at the school. And she kept asking her, I want you to come over for a sleepover. Why can't you come over for a sleepover? And she was very, very persistent. Her parents finally said, you know what? If we can meet this girl's parents and everything looks okay, you can have a sleepover. So this particular trafficker was portraying himself as a single parent. He's a single dad just trying to raise his daughter. And they felt like everything seemed pretty normal when they met him. They didn't have any red flags. Nothing really came up. So that Friday, their daughter went over to this other girl's house for this sleepover. The next morning, the parents woke up and they just had this feeling like something was wrong. So they called over to that house. Nobody answered. And so they got in their car, drove over there, and the house was abandoned, and their daughter was gone. So that's how quick some of these cases can happen. But that's why I mean human trafficking can really occur anywhere. Examples of slavery. So where is this happening? What are the industries that might be impacted by human trafficking? Well, looking at commercial sex, prostitution, massage parlors, truck stops, pornography, fake modeling agencies. Here in Bismarck, we had an individual going to the mall, following young girls and trying to convince them that they could be models and telling them, hey, I have a photography studio at home. So all you have to do is just come with me to my house. I'll take these pictures and then we'll get your career started. That happens right here in our community. Labor trafficking, where we see it more so in North Dakota, you're definitely going to see it when it comes to like nail salons, restaurants, but even our agriculture industry. We have a lot of people who are actually trafficking on honey farms, dairy farms, things like that. So it is all around us. Organ removal or organ trafficking, we won't get into that too much because of time today, but that is another type of trafficking. This typically happens a little bit more in underdeveloped countries. You will have somebody who will go to a country, offer $1,500 for their kidney. Kidney is the most trafficked organ. And a lot of times they will sell that kidney because if you are living in a community where you have absolutely nothing, $1,500 is a lot of money. And they will have the surgery, probably not done by a surgeon, and then that organ will be trafficked to somebody else who probably paid $200,000 for it. Might have an idea of where it came from, might have no idea where it came from. So it's a whole nother industry out there that we don't talk as much about, but in the past couple of years has kind of started to rise to the surface. Who are the traffickers? Anyone, right? Anyone can be a trafficker. I think sometimes we have this vision in our mind of what a trafficker looks like. And maybe it's somebody who's running a gang or some large criminal network, that's going to be our trafficker, when that's not the case. I have seen doctors traffic patients. I have seen boyfriends traffic their girlfriends. That's actually one of the most common ways. So we're kidding ourselves if we think that people we know might never engage in this type of activity, because in reality they do. 50% of the people that are trafficked by people they know. We have one example in North Dakota where the trafficker was a father selling his daughter for sex. It started by first selling it to his friends, and then realizing he could make a good profit, and then started marketing her on a bigger, wider base. So that's the kicker with this, is often it's literally 50% are people that you know, which also makes this challenging too, of why is it so difficult to walk away? So I'm just going to briefly talk about this. In North Dakota, we first had legislation in regards to human trafficking in 2015. So now in North Dakota, the Uniform Act on Prevention of Remedies for Human Trafficking is added to the North Dakota Century Code. So outside of running 31A project, I also run the demand reduction program here for the state. And that was brought up in 2015 as well. And what the demand reduction program is for buyers. So individuals who typically purchase over the age of 18 get sentenced to this class, where they learn why their actions make a difference in our community. So they learn about human trafficking, health implications. What do we mean by a healthy relationship? And things like that. So that's another way here in the state of North Dakota we're trying to combat this problem, is also targeting the demand. And at any point, if you have any questions, please, because I feel like I talk fast sometimes. I show you this picture to show you that traffickers are not just male, they're also females. This was a female trafficker that was arrested in MINOT. She was recently sentenced this past spring. So again, we have this visualization that it's mainly men, and it's not. It can be male or female. So now I have a question for you. What would you value your life at? Like if somebody told you to put a price on your life, how much do you think you're worth? Could you put a value? Some of us would say priceless, right? Okay, so I'm going to turn this a little bit. If somebody is being sold for sex, what do you think the average price is for somebody being sold for a sex act? Or even sold to another person. So a trafficker might sell their victim to somebody else. What do you think that average price is? Anybody have a guess? Couple thousand? Okay. The average price of someone sold into slavery today is $90. $90, let that sink in for a second. And that's even high in some cases. I've seen individuals sold for amounts such as $10. Now when we look at 1809, the average person sold into slavery was sold for $40,000. Either way, it doesn't make this right at all. But what is this telling us about human life? Yeah, our value continues to decrease. Why is this? Well, first off, it's easier to move people from place to place. It used to be difficult to transport people. Now it's relatively easy. Also, population growth. There's so many people. Traffickers see this as an opportunity. If this isn't working with you, I'll get rid of you because there's somebody else new out there that I can get access to. So we also have that to consider too, that makes this a difference when we look into that amount. Some other stats, it's really hard to track human trafficking. So keep in mind that these stats, it's probably lower when we think of the industry as a whole. But on average, on a yearly basis, this is a $150 billion industry. A couple of years ago, human trafficking was bringing in more money than Nike, Google, and Starbucks combined on a yearly basis. I think all of us have used those companies in some way, gotten a Starbucks, you use Google probably every day, and it's hard to imagine that an industry such as human trafficking was making more money than those three companies combined. It's estimated that there's about 45 million slaves in the world today, but again, keep in mind, we don't have people just coming up and saying, I have been trafficked. That doesn't happen. And because of that, it's really hard to say how many people are really enslaved in the world today. This is also considered to be the fastest growing criminal industry. So these stats here are specifically for sex trafficking. The average age of entry into or someone being trafficked is 12 to 14. Average age. So we know that there's people who have been younger, also people who are older that are being trafficked. A pimp typically keeps 4 to 6 people in what he would call or she would call their stable. So often a pimp refers to the amount of people they have as 6 horses in my stable, right? Meaning like I have 6 people in my stable. On average, they make $200,000 a year per child in sex trafficking. So think about that. If I'm making $200,000 just off of one person, maybe I get a little greedy. Maybe I think this isn't a bad industry. I'm doing pretty well. And you can see where this mindset quickly changes for people. And they forget to think about the fact that they're selling humans. This isn't a product, they're selling human beings. But they see it as just another object because they see the dollar signs that are coming in from it. Now, once somebody is trafficked, the average lifespan is about 7 years that they are able to survive. And a lot of it has to do with what they're fed, the diet. They're expected to sleep or engage in sexual activities 10 to 12 times a day. So all of those things combined, there's no way. It would be very, very hard to live a relatively long life after experiencing something like that. Here are a few apps as well to look at if you have children or just to monitor. We have these out on the table out there too. They're just some handouts to be aware of. And here are some Hotline Statistics. So this is from this. These are calls that have happened in regards to human trafficking across the nation, put on by Polaris Project. But then we'll look at North Dakota. So this map needs to be updated because we've actually had quite a few more cases this year than we did last year. So this will have to be updated, but this is where cases of human trafficking has occurred. So as you can see, it's small communities as well as large communities. So I sometimes think that we have this thought it's just happening in these really large communities, when in reality it can be a town of less than 1,000 people where trafficking is occurring. Okay, so I wanted to show you the difference of how do people get access to this? If I want to purchase somebody, how do I do it? Well, one way that it used to be done was using Backpages. Backpages was shut down this past spring, but now there's several websites out there that have a similar look to Backpages. They're not called Backpages, some are called like iBackpages, and then of course there's other sites out there. But I do this to show you, here's a slave ad from 1829, and if you look on to the further side, that's what a slave ad would look like today. So you're probably thinking, what? This doesn't really make sense. When you click on one of those links, a picture will come up. That is the person that you can engage in a conversation with and set a price to purchase them for some type of sex act. Now, the person you are talking to is typically the trafficker. It's not the individual themselves. The other problem with sites like this is majority of the pictures on there are of individuals, children under the age of 18, which is another problem, which is why people fought so hard to get that site taken down. But why is this important? So when we do our sting operations, ads like this are what are placed. And then on the other end, it's usually somebody, a law enforcement officer, that is responding to the person that's clicking on the link. So here's an example of how it looks like. There was a male who was in his 30s, and this happened in Williston. He went to Backpages, clicked on an ad, started engaging in a conversation, said he was looking to purchase a 12-year-old. And they said, yeah, we do have a 12-year-old. And he's like, okay, if you have a 12-year-old, do you happen to have a 10-year-old? Because I'd rather purchase a 10-year-old. And they said, we do, but she's not ready, so we think you'll be much happier with that 12-year-old. So they fixed a price and a place to meet the next day. And sure enough, the next day he showed up with the cash that he was going to pay them, but he was welcomed by law enforcement instead. So that's how some of these sting operations look like. You might have remembered Operation Guardian Angel, which was a sting done across the nation, as well as in several locations here in North Dakota. Okay, so children. Among the diverse populations affected by human trafficking, children are at particular risk to sex trafficking and labor trafficking. I share that because we really do have to think about our children when we talk about human trafficking. Some of the photos that you do see, these are photos when I was in Guatemala. We noticed that there was garbage dumps. People would often kidnap kids, traffic kids, force them to work in garbage dumps to pick up garbage and then sell the garbage. So this was very common. And some of the photos are photos that I was able to get as I was working in Guatemala. So what are some risk factors? Okay, poverty, yes, right? We know that that can play a role in human trafficking. Prior abuse or neglect. Children who have been part of the welfare or juvenile justice system. Homelessness, mental health issues, feelings of rejection. When I talk to schools, one of the biggest things I tell them is we have to be there for other people. We need to be that other person's friend, because what we know today is on average, people feel like they have 3 to 5 people that they can really trust. When I talk to kids, I'm lucky if they can name 3 people that they feel they can really go to if they're in trouble. So we really need to be there just to be there for people and just to let them know that whatever happens to you, I am here. I won't judge you. I will try to help you. Because that's the other problem in a lot of these scenarios is kids, adults, they feel like they have no one they can talk to because they're not going to forgive them or they're going to think they're a terrible person. When in reality, that's not often the case. There are people out there that do want to help, do want to listen. So these are definitely risk factors. I've also seen though cases of human trafficking where on the outside of a home, everything looks completely fine. You have what appears to be a very stable family, but yet a daughter is being trafficked and the parents have no idea it's happening while she's living underneath their roof. So again, just being aware is so important. A few other indicators. So depending where you work, some things to look at as well. Evidence of controlling or dominating relationships, signs of malnutrition, fatigue, history of running from home or foster care placements, always tired. Maybe they were a really happy person, really outgoing, involved in a lot of things, and all of a sudden they're not. They're not showing up on time, they're rarely there, and where they used to be there all the time. Why? We need to ask those questions of why. Venues. So where are people being recruited? Bus stops used to be the number one way, right? Obviously that's shifted. Social media. Social media is a giant that we're up against when it comes to human trafficking. I often tell people, don't just add people so you have the most friends online. Who are the people you're adding? Who are the people you're talking to? You need to be aware of that before you just add people. Traffickers will often prey on vulnerable people, right? So if on Facebook I have, my parents are terrible, nobody likes me, I have no friends, well, I'm going to be your friend, right? That's the mind of the trafficker. I'm going to engage in a conversation with you. I'm going to tell you, you're right, your parents do suck. I could be a good friend to you. How about we meet and engage in conversation with them? So they're looking for people who are putting those things out there because they're going to be their friend, they're going to be their support. And so it's important of even how we portray ourselves online. People are watching that, and we just have to think about that. And if you have children, monitor their devices and what they're looking at. Did you have a question? Oh, sorry. Thought I saw a question. Okay. Some questions to ask. Obviously, you need to frame this in your own verbiage, but some things you can ask people if you do suspect that they might be trafficked. Can you leave your job? Do you live with your employer? Are you in debt to your employer? Do you have your passport or identification? Typically, if somebody is being trafficked, that's going to be one of the first things that's taken from them, is their identification. So just noticing those things. Okay, so here was a girl who was trafficked from Las Vegas to MINOT. Her 2 traffickers were, I believe it was a 19-year-old and a 21-year-old male. And I just show you, she was 16, that of how quickly it is to traffic one person from one state to another. So it's very quick to do. I think we think it's not easy to move people, but here's a perfect example of where This girl was missing in Las Vegas, and they found her in MINOT. So just a few terms I want to share with you to think about when we hear this phrase, human trafficking, is of course thinking about branding. Often traffickers will brand their victims. It's a symbolization to show ownership. So they're showing ownership over them. You're my property. Barcodes used to be a big thing. Now it's often a theme. So one of our trafficking survivors, her particular pimp had a Western theme. So all of her brandings were of cowboy hats, cowboy boots, things in that nature, because that was just his theme that he used. So keeping in mind of, does it look like there is a theme amongst their tattoos? Or even asking, hey, what's the story behind that tattoo? One of our survivors told us, every time somebody asked her, she had a different story. But nobody ever questioned why her story was different every time. Even the same person that asked her several times, she would have a different story. But just recognizing those signs. John is also what we refer to as buyer. We've tried to scoot away from that a little bit and just use the word buyer. Just because there's a lot of people named John out there as well, and there can actually be some confusion with that. Seasoning, this is often what people go through when they are trafficked. So usually this will involve physical abuse, mental abuse, starvation, things like that. And this is really to show them that if you try to leave, this is what's going to happen to you, or this is what's going to happen to your daughter or your son. And then circuit is what I meant by moving people from place to place. So we have a Minnesota circuit. There's other circuits across the nation, and really it's just moving people from place to place. So there's designated stops within that circuit where people are being trafficked from place to place. So that's just a few of the terms. Here are some of those brandings I was talking about. So we do have, what's great, we even have some tattoo artists here in North Dakota, right here in Bismarck, who have actually volunteered their time and resources to change some of people's brandings to things that they want. Because we know it's really hard to remove some of these tattoos, and some of them are so large. So what some tattoo artists are able to do is at least change it to something that they want, which maybe you can't remove it, but at least it's something you chose versus something that somebody else chose for you. So that's one way we're able to help. But as you can see, the barcodes, it was a big trend. And then they shifted away to having like the pimp's initial, maybe he has a nickname, things like that. So that's typically what we see with brandings. And sometimes it might just be this small little design. So it doesn't necessarily always have to be a really, really large tattoo. What victims want to know. So we were working with a group of victims, and it's often very difficult for them to be able to get in front of a group of people and tell their story. And to be quite honest, it's very traumatizing to do that. So something that they asked for us to share. Think about things from our point of view. Never say you understand because you haven't been there, but still try to put yourself in our shoes. Language counts. The words you use make a difference. Calling us prostitutes hurts us. We may act hard, but we have to have the wall up for survival. Deep down, we know we need help. We need more information about your services, and we need it to be in places where we can see it, whether it's public restrooms, bus stops, shelters, clinics. I tell you, when I always carry with me some magnets and just brochures, and no matter where I go, I travel quite a bit for work. When I go to a restroom, I pin up a sign. I set it there. If somebody has to remove it, that's fine. But at least I know I left it there, and hopefully someone will be able to see it. So just doing those small things can really make a difference. And what can you do? So now you have a little understanding of what we mean by human trafficking. And sometimes it's really difficult to take a step back and figure out what can we do. And there's little things you can do, such as, where are you buying your food? Where are your clothes coming from? Just researching that, making sure that they're coming from a fair trade source or somebody who believes in really good business ethics. Education, continue to educate yourself, whether it's through 31A Project or Find, or read books, documentaries. There's so many great ones, and we have lists out there for you to look at. And just hosting your own discussions. If you're part of a book club, maybe your next book is on human trafficking. If you have little kids, I'm Little Red is a great 10-minute film I'd be happy to share with you. It's based on the premise of I Am Little Red Riding Hood, but they use the wolf in there. He's actually portraying what a pimp would be like. But you're able to actually break down the content and have a conversation with your children about what we mean when we talk about human trafficking. Because sometimes this can be really difficult to break down, even for adults, let alone a 10-year-old child. As a faith community, utilizing tools and roles offered to further awareness, understanding of human trafficking. So we actually have, I have some and Leslie has some as well. Shared Hope International has a faith toolkit. So if you want to do a Bible study on it, if you want to give a sermon, we actually have sermons that you can give, movies you can show, and it's targeted for women, females, youth, as well as just church leadership. So we have different resources that you can utilize that way. And then, of course, continuing to partner with local organizations, hosting discussions at your home, as well as even hosting a candlelight vigil or prayer gathering for those impacted by sex trafficking. So those things can make a difference, but you're making a difference already just by being here today and hearing this information on human trafficking. So before we open it up, if you have any quick questions, I want to leave you with this quote. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. So even though this might seem large and how can we really make an impact, we are just by hearing the knowledge and spreading it and educating other people. You're already making a difference. So please keep that in mind when you think about this and how big it is, that just by you sharing the information with other people, you are making a difference. Okay, so with that, does anybody have any questions? And I know Leslie is here as well and can answer any questions too. I threw a lot at you. Yes.
Say you're in the airport or restaurant or something, you see something
Yes.
odd, like what, that hotline,
Yes.
what are you going to get on the other side of it?
Yeah, so the hotline is always a great number to call. There's literally, it's staffed 24/7. So the human trafficking hotline or call law enforcement. I would start with law enforcement and then I would do the human trafficking hotline is what I would recommend that you do. So always call law enforcement. Even if you think, I don't know if this is really a big deal what I'm seeing, it's worth it to call and have them at least check out the situation. Other things you can do if you're at a restaurant, this has happened several times in Bismarck, you see somebody leave and you do have this feeling that something's wrong, write down everything you can about the two people that left. So we had a situation where there was a much older male with this younger girl who looked distressed, couldn't make eye contact, which is something that traffickers often teach their victims is you can't make eye contact with people. So she couldn't look, she was in tattered clothing, was shaking, was literally scared. And they left and nobody took down any information like what was his license plate? What type of car was he driving? Things like that, because we can report that to law enforcement. So those things might seem so minor, but it's not. It makes a really big difference in these types of cases. And just because you think somebody else is probably called, the fact is they probably haven't. So be the person to make the call and to report it. And it's okay if 10 people do. If 10 people do, that's great. But that doesn't always happen. We're lucky if one person will call and make a report. And what we also have found, like with the situation with the mall, several people had called our Bismarck Police Department to file complaints about this. And so then it became a consistent theme and we could look further into the case. So it's important. Thank you for saying that or asking that. Yes. Yeah. So I'm trying to remember actually. Right. So I think Rebecca actually, I think she ran away if I'm correct. But one survivor I work with, she still had enough leeway with her trafficker where how she finally got out. She actually said she was going to visit a relative and she never came back. But she doesn't remember doing that. Like to this day, she still doesn't really know how she got out. So I think that happens often too, is because a lot of times with trafficking as well, drug addiction ends up coming and following quickly too, because people will revert to that, numbing themselves to what they have to go through. That's their only way they can survive. So then you also have that. So coming out of trafficking, sometimes you actually don't even know how you got out. So every story is a little bit different. Some people are able to escape, they're able to get away. Sometimes people are able to intervene and jump in soon enough and help them that way as well. For a lot of people though, they don't feel comfortable even when their trafficker is in prison. They still have this angst or anxiety that they're going to be released and they're going to be able to find them. And that's why these type of situations are much more difficult than other types of cases out there, because on average, a person will go back to their trafficker 10 to 12 times. 10 to 12 times. And a lot of it is just that they've been told that nobody will like them, that they're worthless, that their trafficker is the only person that's going to care for them. And then they realize, yeah, they're right. Or something happens with a service provider and they're like, yeah, this isn't working. And then they'll end up going back. So it takes a lot of time and patience when you're working with people who have been trafficked. And a lot of it goes back to that trauma bonding and Stockholm syndrome that we're not really able to dive into so much today, but that has a lot to do with it as well. So it's difficult. It's difficult to leave. And then once you are able to leave, getting people the proper resources as well, which I'll say in North Dakota, we have done a better job in the past couple of years. We have some really great human trafficking protocols that many of our communities across the state follow. So when we do suspect somebody who's being trafficked or has run away and we think it's a human trafficking case, we can get them the support services that they need in a timely manner. I know that doesn't answer it clearly, but I'll tell you, human trafficking, nothing is really clear when we work. It's when we think we have kind of figured it all out, there's still something new that happens that we didn't expect to happen. But that's part of it.
So the example you gave in Minnesota, so that man would have had to have enrolled that girl in school and rented a house.
Right, and so that, yes, so that frustrates people a lot too, right? Is the ability to get false identity. I don't think people realize that how often people do it, or get documents, get papers. They have the right resources. Because think about it, if you're making about $200,000 on a person a year, right? Times that times how many other people that you might be trafficking, you have the resources to pay people off, to do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do. And you can't be successful without having those other business partners. Which, if you notice the term, we called it facilitators, and that's what we mean, is you work with a bunch of different people, maybe in the hotel industry, maybe you have an insight into the law enforcement side, and you work with these people, but you're basically paying them off, and that's how you're able to be successful. So I think that's the crazy part, is we're like, how? How are they able to go in there? But then also keep in mind that for some of these people, it's their parents that are doing the trafficking as well. So then that adds a whole nother layer into it. It's not hard to enroll them into a school or things like that. So, yeah, it's a lot to comprehend, and that's why it's hidden so often. Yet it's like right there in front of it, but we don't always see it. So that's why just looking for these signs and asking questions, that's one step we can do. Any other questions? Yeah.
So when you think, like the missing persons of our country, you hear all these statistics of people that are missing and nobody knows where they went. Is human trafficking the figure, is that connected?
Yeah, we're definitely starting to make more of a correlation with that. Even with, like I said, the child welfare, even foster care, or looking at people with disabilities, caregivers that are doing some of the trafficking as well. So we're starting to talk about it more. There wasn't a lot in the past couple of years. I've been doing this since 2006, and I'll tell you, in the beginning, that wasn't even brought up. Where now that's actually been a bigger conversation of who are these people? Because they say within 48 hours, once somebody runs away within 48 hours, their likelihood of being picked up by a trafficker is extremely high. So yes, a very strong correlation with people who go missing. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, yep. I actually even teach a course on human trafficking at some of the colleges. So we take a whole semester to work on all this information and to figure out how, in their role that they're going to graduate in, what they can do to help combat human trafficking, but educate the people that they're going to be working with as well. But it's something I hope to see that almost all colleges have it. I think it's just necessary, and I think that regardless of what field you're in, you have to know the information. It's important for you to hear it. And yes?
You've gone over a lot of different scenarios
Mm-hmm.
that happen, how this occurs. And the Rebecca,
Yeah.
the video that you played, it sounds like the trafficker invested a lot of time in sold
Mm-hmm.
her. And I'm wondering, does that make prosecution for the trafficker very difficult? Because it seems like it was a one-on-one relationship, not so much that he had more girls in the stable or whatever.
Yes, it is difficult. So it also makes a difference too if a trafficker is trafficking across state borders as well. Like that's going to make a difference. And if they're trafficking children or if it's primarily over the age of 18. I will say as a nation, we have gotten better at looking at these cases and understanding the trauma bonding and what's happening to these girls or guys that are being trafficked, but it has taken a long time for judges or even jury panels to understand what's really happening.
Right, because it would seem like
They chose it, right?
exactly.
Right.
You know, this was your boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
You decided to do this. You were living a
Yep.
life with him.
And so what that trafficker was doing is something we called grooming. So he was grooming Rebecca to take her, move her away from her family. But keep in mind, he also claimed that he was a radio producer or music producer. So he was gone a lot as well. So we also have to keep in mind, like, as he was gone, he was probably working with several other people too. Yeah.
It wasn't so much a one-on-one.
Right.
He was probably grooming a number of girls at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And depending at this point, he might have several people he's already trafficked that are out there working, and he's just adding, right? He's just adding to basically his stable at that point. But these cases are extremely difficult because of what you just said, is to get judges to understand and to have somebody who's been trafficked to go in court and testify. That is so difficult, and to see their trafficker sitting there.
It's re-victimization.
Right. And so now we do have a lot of survivors out there that will go and testify on behalf of other survivors that are leading, like Rebecca now, she actually does a lot of testifying in courts on behalf of other victims of human trafficking, and she explains the trauma bonding, the Stockholm Syndrome, what they experienced, and why it wasn't that easy to just walk away. And so that's helped. But it's very difficult to ask somebody who's in this situation and knowing that their trafficker might be released in a couple of weeks or a couple of days to go and do that. So as though a nation, I feel like we've gotten better about talking about it than we were a couple years ago even. I will say, though, there's still 26 states out there where if you're under the age of 18, you can be arrested for prostitution. So that's a problem, too, changing our laws as well, because no 15-year-old should be arrested for prostitution. Like, that's a problem in itself. And as well as people who choose this, I can tell you in North Dakota, 99% of the people we have worked with have not chosen to be trafficked, or have not chosen prostitution. They have been forced into prostitution. From a national average, about 90% is what we see are forced. They don't choose. So it's important to understand those statistics as well. Yeah. Right. So we don't have an exact statistic for younger boys, but I can tell you it happens often. We say 50% of people trafficked are children, and then we say on that higher scale that 80% are female. So we know it happens, though. There are literally countries where that's their main market. People go there to purchase a little boy. That's their specific niche, and people will go and do that. It's something we are starting to talk about more as well, too, is that there are males that are being trafficked, and particularly little boys, and we can't just look over that. and figuring out how do we give them support, because support for a male is going to look a little bit different than support for a female is going to look as well. So, which again, I feel like we're getting better at.
Do you think it's increasing in occurrence, or we're just increasing in awareness?
You know, I think about that a lot, and I think it's both, though. I really do. I think access to social media and things like that, it's just easier, right? Like, it's not difficult. Yes, even when it comes to sexting and all of those things, it's not difficult anymore. So you have that to think about. But I do think because we are becoming more aware as a culture and society, that we're starting to identify in it more. So I do think it's kind of a combination of both of them. And I apologize, I went over time. I can already see that. But thank you all for being here, and I know Pastor Kurt is going to close out the service, but we will be here if you have any other questions. And just thank you for being here and listening. It goes a long way, and I know both Leslie and I appreciate it. So thank you.
Let's thank these guys for coming up and sharing, and for all their hard work and awareness that they're raising. You know, a couple of things that sticks out in my mind when you were presenting here was, there's a couple of Bible verses that stuck out in my mind. One of them is in the book of Romans, the first 2 chapters of the book of Romans. It talks about how a conscience can get severed so that things that you shouldn't do, you do. So these people that are doing these trafficking, it's like, it's hard for us, I think, to get even and say, how could somebody even think about doing this? How could they connive and strategize and budget and plan and to work so hard to get somebody trafficked? It's just so hard to wrap your brain around. But that's why the Bible says, if your conscience gets severed, you can do all kinds of crazy things. And then in the other verse that stuck out to me is in Revelation chapter 18. There's a series of verses in Revelation 18, and it talks about before Jesus comes back. There's this long list in Revelation 18 about things that are being bought and sold. And it goes through this list, cattle, and it goes through anything you can think of, vegetables and lumber and all these things, gold and silver, and it goes through this real long list. And the last 2 things on the list of least amount of value before Jesus returns is human bodies and the souls of people. How severed can a conscience get where, as you say, somebody would traffic a person, a human being that has a soul? And yet, this is what we're seeing. And to see the increase and the increase of trafficking and the decrease of the value since 1809 until now, we're seeing prophecy happen in front of our eyes in this context of human trafficking. And so how close is Jesus coming back? Well, I don't know. He could come back before I finish the sentence. But he didn't. So we have work to do, right? We have work to do. Pray, pray, pray. Call. One thing I did, and I would encourage you all to do this, as I took that 800 number and I put it in my phone. Trafficking hotline 1-888-373-7333. I just put it in there because you know what would happen to me, I'm sure, is I'd be walking down the road, see something, and I wouldn't know who to call. I'm glad you said that about call local law enforcement, because everybody knows 911 nowadays. Remember there was a day when 911 didn't exist? How many of you know your local law enforcement number without 911? Maybe a couple of us, I think it's 223-1212, I think, if I remember right. But if you're in another city, 911 is a beautiful thing. You just boom, boom, boom. And so great practical application. Check out their booth. But would you guys, as we think about this type of evils in our world, one of the things that God has asked, engaged, commanded even us to do is to pray. And that's why we do these Connect cards every week, because we know there's power in prayer, but there's even more power in unity of prayer. So would you guys extend your hands and we'll pray over these Connect cards. Lord, we just come to you, and as we've heard this presentation and we think about severed consciences, and we think about the souls and the human beings that are being trafficked. Those are horrible, horrible, horrible things. And Lord, we want to come into agreement together, just as Stacy and Leslie have shared. Lord, just number one for them, for your strength for them, for your rest for them, for your supernatural provision, protection, and favor as they go about their important ministry. And Lord, for more collaboration, Lord, we're grateful for what we've seen in the increase of collaboration and awareness, but we want to just see more and more and more of that in the name of Jesus. And so, Lord, we just ask you together with one voice for them and their ministry, Lord, that you will just fan it and bring those more new connections and bring more awareness and stir it up in us, God, that we would pray more, get a shawl, and that we would just somehow, some way engage this, not just physically, but spiritually and physically. So we're just grateful for them, Lord, for all of the other Connect cards that are in this basket, Lord, and all the situations they represent. Lord, we want to pray for every big thing and every little thing because you want us to be intimate with you. So, God, we come to you and we pray for every one of these Connect cards. We pray for your Spirit to pour out into every situation and every relationship and every need. And, God, we get to trust it all with you, and we're grateful that we can. And we love you, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So let's stand together and make sure you check out their booth. Let's give it up one more time for Leslie and Stacy coming and sharing on Freedom Sunday here. We'll do it again. And we have our series verse on forever. And this is, boy, you think about somebody who's being trafficked. And, there's people, unfortunately, are being trafficked and they leave this planet and they meet their maker. And this is what he's going to do for them. Let's read it together. He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All these things are gone forever. Revelation 21:4. God bless you guys. Have a great week.